So you're probably wondering what we're doing here. Not necessarily in this just beautiful place, in this amazing setting, but what are we doing here at church? Why this kind of ramp up to a 4-week series that all of a sudden immediately is being played on the screen that looks totally different? Well, first of all, let me tell you what this is not. It's not a new format at our church that we're launching. It's not a new program. It's not some big fundraising campaign that we're trying to get you to give money to pay off the debt of the church or anything like that, or build a new building. It's not a rollout of something we want you to do where you do it not really out of a heart, but you do it because you're committed to the church and you just do it. This is none of that. I'll tell you what this is. This is a journey of unbelievable forgiveness, love, grace, and mercy. It's a story that we want to share with you of what God has been doing in my life and that of our staff around the idea that love and grace are transformative in our lives. And so I want you to do me a favor, and I want you to trust me. I want you to sit back and I want you to enjoy the journey. I want you to watch as 3 individuals allow the Spirit of the Lord to move in their lives, and how through that repentance, through forgiveness, through acceptance, and through honesty, there is something beautiful about God's amazing grace. And when we take grace and put it in the first place, it changes everything. And we've been talking about that some in the last few weeks, and all of those pieces put together lead us to this moment where we say to ourselves, are you willing to trust your pastor? Are you willing for me to be the leader of our church and say, do me a favor, clear the stage out of your life, clear all the clutter, and allow the Lord to speak to you for the next 4 weeks as we take a trek through our authentic story. It will be, I promise, transforming for all of us. Let's go. For me, life is seen as a trek. It takes you places. Places you will never see if you don't dare to go. So much to miss and experience. Frequently, these places you go, you've planned to go there. Often, you just happen to them. Other times, you just wander in. Sometimes they can be dangerous and scary, yet at others, rewarding and breathtaking. There's often an element of surprise, something you didn't expect. But mostly, there's a peace, regardless of the journey. When my wife and I made the move back to Mount Juliet to start life, I kind of came in with this preconceived idea, which was we were going to be successful. We had every reason to think that, and we had every reason because people were telling us that. My pastoral friends, the church that we were at before, there had been some strife and some issues, and many had asked me to stay and pastor a church there, and so it was just, the concept was set in my mind that this was going to be successful. And if that didn't make it happen, what would make it happen is that I'm a fixer. I love to fix things, and so I knew that if there was ever a problem, I could fix it. So we would be a successful church in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of the community, because that's how I felt as we started our church. And so what a great place to be with such gusto we began. And man, it wasn't long that the money was good and people were coming and well-wishers were here, and people would show up that could start doing things, and lives were being touched and lives were being changed. The big drop, the big move for us happened when we were given, well, not given, but we actually acquired the 30 acres that the Life Campus is today. And then we began building the physical building, and we actually built it ourselves. We call it the Cyrus Project, where King Cyrus asked, who will go with me and build the temple? And so I said, who will go with me and build the temple? And so the people of the church came out. We'd build the building and physically, and it was amazing. And the respect that we gained in the community during that time, I think was probably one of the joys for me, is that people saw what was happening, and there was a sense that we were moving in the right direction. And so all the pieces of the puzzle were coming together, just so incredibly perfect. We had money. The great part about it was that I had the opportunity to work with my wife, who we had shared the same office for the previous 10 years in ministry together. And now we were able just to transport that into what we were doing now, which was just a great joy. And it wasn't long, we started hiring some staff members, and Pastor Roy, our children's pastor, he and I had been together for several years, about 12 actually. And you know, Roy came to us, and it was an amazing journey that the very first Sunday he said, where you go, I'll go. And so the very first Sunday we had church, we had children's ministry full blown. And since I was working in a secular job as well at the time, which helped us have more money in the church, it let me hire other pastors along the way. And I hired John, and Laura came, and what a great opportunity it was to see them come and to be a part of what we were doing. So life was positioned really, really good. And so with our staff, we began to move forward.
So I'm a third-generation pastor, and I found myself as a public school teacher. I went to school in East Tennessee and was teaching school, and was also a youth pastoring in a little church there. My wife and I loved the community, and I met a guy named Terry who was really the only leader in my life who seemed to care about me. And I was in a Christian rock band. We were traveling and playing, and I was doing all these things at the same time. And I took my youth group to an event at Kings Island up in Cincinnati called Summer Blast. And man, that weekend there was just so many different people that converged as were going to become a big part of our story in a way we didn't know. There was a guy named Reggie Dabbs who was the speaker, who ended up being a great friend of mine and someone I write with a lot. And then Terry was there. It was his first event, who was a leader in my life, who spoke into my life. And then there was this guy named Andrew Wharton who was doing the media. And Terry kind of connected us, and Andrew and I developed a friendship over the years. We'd run into each other here and there. And to make a long story short, about 2 years later after that event, I was at this church for 4 years. It had 12 youth pastors in 10 years, and I was just fired one day without cause. And we were just devastated. We had been invested in that community and that church, and we really didn't know what was going to happen. And then Andrew called. The phone rang, and Andrew called. And somehow, after leaving public school, I found myself as the youth pastor at Life. You know, I had grown up in a tiny church and attended small churches in East Tennessee, and I really wasn't looking for a church experience that was going to be big, but I was ready for something that would be healthy, that would grow. And man, here in Mount Juliet, everything just felt different. It was very relational, and we were hurting, Laura and I, from our past experiences in ministry, and life was just like a breath of fresh air. And we had friends. We were finding friends that were becoming like family, and we were getting healed through all these relationships, and especially with Andrew and Roy. And here I was encouraged to develop my creative gifts, like especially in writing and in youth ministry. I think in the past I felt like I had to hide them or do them in secret, but here I was being challenged, like, do them more. And so we were in new jobs and a new life at a new church plant that was meeting, of all places, in a wedding chapel. And every day I found myself working in a mud hole, building a new church facility. So for those first 2 years at Life, I was a full-time youth pastor, and I was a full-time construction worker. And even though the work was really hard, I never felt more alive. I would have rather been on that backhoe up there with Andrew and Roy, joking and learning and laughing and working so hard and building this thing that we're building than anywhere else that I'd ever been in ministry. It was a wonderful time, and we loved it here.
My journey to Life was a little bit different. It actually started 4 years before the church even existed. I was a freshman in college, and I remember sitting down in a class and meeting a young lady named Kristen, who would, fortunately for me, one day become my wife. But we began to date, and it became obvious that in dating her that I was going to have to attend a church. I wasn't really into God at the time, and I certainly wasn't into church, but I was really into her. And so I made the sacrifice, and we attended a few places together, and I would lie to her and tell her I was attending somewhere when I really wasn't. But one night in 2003, she called me and said that her grandparents were going to a meeting about a church that was going to start up in Mount Juliet, and they wanted her to go, and they were going to take them out to dinner afterwards. And so, again, I wasn't really into church, but free dinner at the time was pure gold. And so I showed up at this little wedding chapel, and I sat in the back left corner, and I saw all these people together, and a guy by the name of Andrew Wharton was talking about the kind of church that he wanted to start, and it sounded cool. But once again, I really just wasn't interested. And the next thing I know, I'm sneaking up the back steps at a wedding chapel to the balcony, and I'm sitting in the back row and just sneaking in and out. And I've been here ever since.
Ah, the wedding chapel. When we came to the wedding chapel my first Wednesday night, we had 12 kids in that youth service. And I remember being at the chapel, and the service was supposed to start at 6:30. It was 6:45, and I had one kid. And the other 11 were outside playing football, and I pulled that one kid aside and I said, well, what's going on? And they said, well, it's Wednesday night, we play football. So that's where we began. And we pulled those 12 kids in there, man, and we just began doing all we could do with them, discipling them, teaching them the deepest things in my life that I was discovering, man. And we just tried to go as deep as we could into God's Word. And we were very relational. We banked everything on that, on being relational and working hard at that and living life with one another. That was the key. We thought living life together and good relationships would make things last forever. And man, through that season, I became the busiest guy that anyone knew, and I worked harder than most everyone else I knew except for Andrew and Roy. I could never outwork those guys, and I really prided myself on being able to get more done than other people could get done. I really wanted to be the guy ahead of the pack in that. And I didn't think of it as being prideful. I thought I was being humble, which humble back then meant that I couldn't take a compliment, and I had all these insecurities that I tried to keep everyone around me from seeing. I wanted to make everybody happy, my wife and my boss and my church and my students and our volunteers and our leaders. I wanted everyone to be happy with me, and I was pretty good at it. And it was a really joyful season, and we were doing a lot of really good things. Our kids were incredible, and they would follow me anywhere I would lead them. We would do all kinds of crazy things, and they were right there behind us, and our reputation began to grow as being a good youth group, and kids started showing up on Wednesday nights, and then their families would show up at church, and so our church began to grow. And even when we were meeting in a tent out on the property, we were experiencing good things and good growth. And so we started having, once we moved into the building, like between 80 and 120 kids show up every week in a church of 300. And I think at the time I really thought that our hard work was paying off, and that seemed like a pretty honorable statement to make. And we really focused on arts and education in our ministry, and we were teaching dramas and human videos and guitar lessons and vocal lessons and ACT prep courses. And so we banked everything on this process of keeping busy and working hard in relationships, and it was all really good. And I really tried to train leadership teams and have them take ownership of the group themselves. And the deal was, it all worked. And I was pretty overworked, but I was happy to be so. I was even proud of how overworked I was. So during that time, if you saw me walking down the hallway, man, I wanted you to know that I was busy and I was on my way to do something else. That was kind of how I felt my value. And I was still writing books. In fact, there was times I got so busy I thought I might set writing aside, but Andrew really helped keep that dream alive. And then one day our associate pastor left. And so I really stepped out of just youth ministry and writing and dove headfirst into revamping all of our community efforts. And instead of reading another book, I was too good for that. So I created this small group training and implementation system called Connect 3. And it was color coded and planned and executed with like 100 willing small group leaders in just our very first meeting that I had handpicked and had tapped on the shoulder. And man, it all worked. And the only condition for all of this stuff to keep working was that I had to keep working harder than everyone else I knew to make it work. And that was our culture, creatively and otherwise. We were hard workers, and man, we were happy to be so because it was working.
When you live your life on the back road, you begin to see things that sometimes other people miss. And in my journey here at church, this is the only church I've ever been to. And so I began to see all this stuff going on. I began to see people that looked like they were working hard and they were really busy. And it was cool. It was cool to be a part of it. I always kept it at an arm's distance, didn't want to be too involved. And things started to change in my own personal life. Me and Kristen got married. We began to have kids. I became a public school teacher. I was teaching PE and coaching football about 45 minutes away from here in my hometown. And in 2008, I had an encounter with a man by the name of Ralph Kidd, Kristen's grandfather, who introduced me to the gospel of grace and really introduced me to Christ. And that really changed my life. But I still was teaching, I still was coaching, I was still pursuing, wins and success. And the more I did that, the more I seemed to put the things that really matter on the back burner. My marriage was suffering. I wasn't present in my children's life. And it ultimately led to showing up one night after football practice to an empty house. My wife had taken the kids and she was with her mother. And at that point, I knew something had to change. And so I justified the change as in it had to be the drive. It had to be the 45 minutes I was driving every day to go to work and to get home and to coach. And so I agreed to take another job a little bit closer, still teaching, this time coaching girls basketball in middle school. And so middle school girls basketball can't be that intense. But I found myself right back into the same patterns that I was before. I was spending a lot of time away from home. I was caught up in the things that people were saying about me. I was caught up in the success that I was having. And I came home one more time to an empty house. And at that point, I knew that something really had to change. It was either going to lead to a divorce, or I was going to end up having an affair, or some huge moral failure. And so, about the same time, John Driver was talking to me about the possibilities of coming on and being a pastor. And I really felt unequipped. I didn't even own a Bible, but my marriage and my family life was in such a desperate need for help that anything seemed like an escape. And so in January of 2013, I decided to come on to Life and to be a pastor. And so I went to Lifeway and I bought a Bible. And I didn't know a lot. In fact, I didn't know much of anything. But I did know that I grew up with a work ethic of a farmer. I'm the son of a farmer. And so even though I didn't know a lot of theology and had no clue what I was getting myself into, I knew that I could outwork everybody here. And so that's what I set out to do.
My former pastor had once said to me that if I wanted to build a church or do it my way, that he would always say, well, why don't you go build your own church, squirrel? And that is exactly what was happening to me. I was building a church not only physically, but I was able to build it relationally the way that I wanted to build it. I could build it on friendships. I could build it on relationships, because those are, to me, what sustain the test of time. And people would come along with their plans and ideas and their talents and their skills, and so we would take them and we'd put them in that place, and man, we would just go and get behind them, and man, things were just going along great. We would work at productions. That was a big thing since I came out of that world of media and stuff. We did one production. Pastor John had written a book called Shriveled Heart. It was one of my favorite books, and it still is one of my favorite books. We decided we'd make it into a screenplay and a production and a whole big Easter weekend, and we did it, and man, we spent hours putting that sucker together, and it was amazing, only to have everybody come out of church and go, well, that was really long. So all they ever said about it was it was long. They never said it was good, but man, we worked so hard at it. It was an amazing thing. We worked hard at the Cyrus videos. We did like 64 Cyrus videos for the Cyrus Project, where we would show every Sunday what was happening at the church. And our mission world, we were launching into mission endeavors like crazy around the world. We would find them and we would go there and we would work. And we worked in Bolivia substantially, a lot down there, and we did a lot of work in Panama. And man, we just found ourselves doing the work of the Lord. We'd be involved in community stuff where we would do like the community Easter egg hunt, or we would do Splash in the Park, where we would get with the firemen and we'd get the fire truck out there on 4th of July, and we'd have blow-ups and games and everything, get everybody wet. And it was just so much effort putting forth, and we found ourselves doing some things continually. We would do like men's prayer every Saturday morning. We still do men's prayer every Saturday morning. It's something that we do. We work at to make sure that our prayer is right and that we're positioned right. There's no question that in those early days and over the last several years that we've been spending much time and energy doing the work of the Lord, doing what we feel is the right thing. And as we went along, there was never a question that I was always looking for what's the next thing that's going to make the church grow? What's going to be the thing that takes us and catapults us to the next level? And for me, it was always that kind of foresight, looking for it. Although numbers were never touted, numbers are important because they kind of help keep the machine moving. And so in the thinking of that, we'd launch a whole new teaching series. We launched a myriad of methodologies like life groups. You know, we said everybody needs to be in a life group, and so we worked hard to color code the life groups and to make sure that everybody knew where they could go or find an interest group. Or we decided we would do a multi-site service, or we would do a satellite service. And so we launched that. We launched 2 services because everybody would tell me, man, you're in one service, go to 2, your church will explode. So I've always been, kind of looking for that physical thing that takes us to the next level that we can work at to make it happen. There have been some amazing things that have happened. Some lives have been changed and people have been touched, and that list is long. But there's always, for me, been this idea that we just have to keep pushing. I look back now and I know that what we've done from this point, from today backwards, we have worked so hard at establishing a church in a community, and to get it rooted and to get it settled. And I think if I was just going to kind of maybe be brutally honest with you, I would say that I have worked myself to a place that I would really just call myself a workaholic. That in order to make this journey go where it needs to go, I have to work myself to death.